Hello everyone, welcome to another CGC show. I've been watching some of the comments come in as the pre-roll was going, and so I have to say some special thanks. I have to say thanks to Linda for being up at midnight in Germany to watch the show, and I have to say thanks to Chad's wife, who's in the car listening to a show she probably doesn't really care about, but now that I'm communicating to you from across the world, thanking you for putting up with this show while Chad gets to listen to it in the car. Much appreciated. Thank you. That's funny. Great to see everyone. Claude, Martin, Tenny. It's a very international group right there. We've got Sweden, Japan, Australia. Oh, yes. So, Matt, yes, the plan is specifically for you, Matt. Matt last week said you really need to have something in the background like a pot plant. So, there it is. There it is. It's so lush and green because it's 100% plastic. Yeah, great to see everyone. I was very excited today about the show. Last week I was nervous and jittery because I hadn't done one for so long, so it's sort of I felt a little bit out of practice. But yeah, here we are. I've got Italy calling in, and oh wow, Shenzhen, China. Welcome, wonderful to have you. Yeah, great to see everyone saying hello. Yes, the plant's got the thumbs up from everyone. That's great. Yoko, wonderful to have you. Yoko from Japan as well. So yeah, welcome everyone. We today are going to have a little bit of a in-depth look at slurs. We'll talk about some things. I'll show you some examples, all the different ways that we utilize it in music, and then towards the end we'll also actually go through some practice of them and look at the technique itself on the instrument. But before we get to that, a couple of things I want to share with you. So one is I'm very proud of Evita, my wife. She just started a show at the Joyce Theater in New York City, and she got a write-up in the New York Times and a review in the New York Times. And I mention that because I think there's a bit of a similarity between the classical guitar world and the Lindy Hop world in that in the bigger world of dance or music, classical music, we're a little bit of an underdog. It's sort of in the classical world you've got violinists and piano players and cellists, and in the dance world you've got tango and ballroom and maybe tap and ballet, and Lindy Hop and classical guitar kind of share a similar role. And so it's a marked moment in life when you get to have the recognition on a big stage. So I'm really happy and proud for my wife Evita to be doing what she loves to do and doing it at such a high level. So that's fantastic. The show is called Swing Out, and you can Google it and maybe come up with some things. The other thing I wanted to ask is a little bit of a favor. So as many of you know, the podcast, along with everything else, was put on a bit of a hiatus for the last 6 months or so. But I would like to get it going again. But I wanted to start up a new format. There's a format that I listen to in another podcast I really admire, which is kind of a shorter span of talking as opposed to, normally they've been an hour plus. I might still have some interviews as well, but there's a question and answer at the end, and the questions are submitted. So let me show you. So my request is, if you're interested, to submit a question, and I want to show you how to do it. Technology. Okay, so yes, you go to CGC and you go up to the menu and click on podcast, and then there's a little button there that says submit a question. Click on that and it takes you to this little site called SpeakPipe, and it'll just allow you to record audio from your phone or your computer. So it's really very easy to do, and you click start recording. Okay, yep. And you ask a question, you say, Simon, why was it that you were failed? How did you fail at your career as an NBA star? Was it your height or just your skill level? And then, your name and email. I didn't know you had to do that. But anyway, you put in the name and email and you send it away. And then I get an email with the little audio recording, and then I can use that in the podcast. And I was very grateful to Emmanuel, who sent in a question from last time. which was great. The only tricky thing with the questions on the podcast is it needs to be a question that I can answer sort of verbally, as opposed to, I can obviously play some things as well, but it's not a visual format, so it doesn't work the same way as a video or a live stream like this. So if you're interested, I'd love to have some questions come in on the podcast, and that would give me the ability to keep going with that format. So what else? Let's dive into the world of slurs. So I'd like to start with the name Slur. So in other styles of guitar, particularly rock and pop, they're also known as hammer-ons and pull-offs. And I think the names are kind of important, and Slur as a name is actually maybe not the best. And I did want to ask Nikki, who's in the chat. Nikki is Italian, but also fluent in Spanish. And Nikki, tell us the names for slurs in Italian and Spanish, if you wouldn't mind. Because I think those terms are actually much more connected to their musical sound and function. So there's always a bit of a delay with what I say and then the chat. But these terms, I think, are better suited. And then if you could also mention, Nikki, what the term is for legato, so connected notes. So Nikki said legature, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, in Italian, and ligados in Spanish. And then the word for legato, the connected notes in those languages, if you wouldn't mind. And you'll see that these are kind of a bit more connected. And Linda's saying in German it's called Bindung, as in connection. Oh, nice. So even that, the German word actually, I think, is a bit more connected with, so Nikki is saying that in Italian, and I assume in Spanish as well, is actually legato is legato. So we use Italian terms in English, in the English world of music as well. So the connection is legature in Italian and legato. So it's a very connected word. And as Linda said, in German, it's Bindung, which means connection. So in the English-speaking world of classical music on the classical guitar, the word slur is not as good. It's not as functional a word. I would argue that hammer-on and pull-off are actually a bit more descriptive, a bit more accurate in their description of what's actually going on. They're talking about the mechanics of what's going on as opposed to the sound or the musical function. So literally hammering on or pulling off. But within those, I think there's also a little bit of something to dig into, especially for beginners, to understand, so hammer on, I think, is a good word to use, but pull off is perhaps one that is a little misleading, because I think if you had someone that doesn't play guitar at all, to pull something off, it'd be just moving straight up. And that is one of the technical things that happens sometimes, where the finger just comes off and we don't get too much of a sound. So I thought it'd just be interesting and appropriate to start out with the names of it, because slur in English is not the greatest name. I'd be interested, actually, this is a tricky question, but if you have in the chat, if you have any ideas of what we could change the name to, let us know. For me, it's maybe using actually kind of like in Spanish and Italian, like legatos or ligados, or something that's very closely connected with the idea of connecting those notes. But naming is a tricky thing. So let's dive into talking about the slurs themselves. I see slurs very much in two different worlds. We've got technical slurs and musical slurs. And what I mean by that is technical slurs help us in a technical way. It might make something easier to play. It also might help us with right-hand fingering alternation. And we're going to look at the examples of these. And the musical one is we're using the slur for the way it sounds, the way it affects the music. So often between the two notes, we get the attack of the right hand on the first note and the second note is a little softer. So that has a musical effect, and we can see that in the case of suspensions. We can see it in the case of joining phrases together. Sorry, I got distracted. Chad was saying slore? I don't know how to say that. In Danish, for wobble. Wobble. That's one I haven't come across before. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples. Here's some I prepared earlier. So Bach for Vendetta said, for the left hand, the mechanics are close to plucking. So left hand pluck. Yeah, that's a good point. We will look at that in terms when we get to the mechanics of it, the idea of sort of doing a free stroke slur and a rest stroke slur. I can't remember where I heard that idea like named, but I think it's a really nice approach to it. So we'll have a look into that in a little bit. But let's have a look now at some examples of slurs in context, and we can go through this idea of technical versus musical and see them in different lights, so to speak. All right, here we go. Okay, so, all right, so this first example here is an example of a technical consideration. So this is, we can play the naming game as well. I think a lot of CGC students would actually be very familiar with these pieces. But this example here is from Gaspar Sanz and the Ruggiero. And what I've done is I've implemented a fingering here that actually is not particularly good, but we're just going to use it for argument's sake. And what it does is, in several cases actually, it has an awkward string cross, which we'd rather avoid if we could. We can do them, but we've got the M. If you have a guitar handy, you can put your M finger on the second string and your I finger on the first string. And feel that sort of, it's a little slightly awkward in the right hand. So a couple of ways we can get around that. One, we could just start on the I finger, which is normally what we would do. But this is a hypothetical situation, so pretend that doesn't have an example. So what we could do, if we wanted to fix up this fingering here, then we could simply add in a slur here. So that would mean that we're not actually using the I finger there. And suddenly, on this note, we'd be on the I finger. I, M. And we get that tick, good string cross. So a good example of a technical slur is we're using that technique to change the alternation of the fingers. So I hope that's an okay example of being just like enforcing the issue here. But you could use it as an example in any given scale with a string cross. And of course, we need to rely on our technique that it should be comfortable with string crosses that are on the awkward side as opposed to the more comfortable side. But if we can, we prefer to have the more comfortable. So using a slur here is going to actually put the alternation on the right finger. Now, the next two examples of slurs where they help with speed or make something easier. So this famous example, which I'm sure you'll recognize quite quickly, never mind the fact that the slurs connect the pairs of notes that makes it sound quite different. Here we have the right hand only has to move, well, you get the idea, only has to move on every second note, because the alternating note is taken care of by the slur. If, however, we had to play every single note with the right hand, it becomes that much more challenging as opposed to... So in this case, these slurs serve two purposes, in my opinion. They're musical, they join the pairs of notes, but it also makes it much easier to play fast and flowing, that whole passage. And it helps with the speed of that passage to make it very florid and virtuosic. Similarly, so again, a technical slur example. Similarly here, this slur here, if you ever see a slur marked in with a dotted line, that is signifying that it's an editorial slur. So this piece is originally written for keyboard, in which you cannot do a slur. So you can imitate the relationship between the notes, but you can't actually do the mechanical version of it. And so this slur marking would never have been written in by Domenico. We're on a first name basis. So that means when we're translating it or arranging it for the guitar, we're just noting that that was never in the original music, and that's an editorial slur. But as this little passage, as that passage is quite fast, again, it helps with launching that note. Dee-da-da-da-dum-bum-bum. This just takes out one extra right-hand finger stroke and makes it that much easier. And I would also argue that at the beginning of fast scale runs, slurs help to launch into those passages. Another good example is, I have to sit properly to play this one. That's from Barrios Waltz number 4. Dee-da-dee-da-da-da-da. So, slur. All those slurs help to propel the music and gives it that feeling of speed. So I'm going to pause for a second on the screen share and see if anyone has any questions about technical slurs. I think it's relatively self-explanatory. If you'd like to see any right-hand examples, I can do that for you as well. But I think more or less the technical slur aspect is pretty straightforward. So you've got the fact that it can put the finger on the other foot, so to speak, and change the alternation and fix up any alternation issues. And also can provide speed and ease. Oh, I see James Erickson is in the chat. Hi, James. Thank you for tuning in. James is one of our wonderful teachers at CGC. I'm sure Sunny would be here if she could, but it's probably quite late for her. Midnight, I think, as Linda was saying. I see a lot of etymology. Yes, people are talking about the origins of... Yeah, Crystal was saying, can't we just call it ligature, like in Italian and Spanish? Yeah, I mean, I think the words hammer-on, pull-off, and slur are so deeply ingrained in our vocabulary as classical guitarists and musicians in general that it would be a hard one to change, but I think we could use those. We use so many Italian and Spanish words in our playing already, so I don't think it would be that much of a translation. Oh, that's interesting. So Linda is saying that binden in Germany also means to tie. So this comes up a little bit, I think in Spanish, I can't remember what the word is, ligatura? Anyway, but the phrasing idea as well, tie, a tied note, and a slur has the same note, same meaning. So I guess binden also means that in German. Chad's asking, any tips for descending slurs on the low E or A? Do you mean that, as you know, it feels different or it's more technically challenging on the lower strings than on the upper? They are different. But I don't think the technique differs in any particular way. The thickness of the string and also the tension of the strings might make a difference. At the moment I have these carbon strings on that I rarely put on, but they feel so much tighter on the trebles. But if you have nylon strings, whether it be high tension or medium tension, they're actually a little more flexible, and so the slurs feel quite different on those treble strings. There's more give in the strings. Yeah, Linda was saying that, so the tied notes in English are ones that were held instead of being played again. Exactly. So, and we're going to come up against it and have a look at this difference in symbols, what they mean in music. But a tie between two notes sometimes is a little confusing between ties and slurs. So Chad's saying that, yeah, the slurs on the 5th and 6th string are more difficult. So, I mean, the hand position changes a little bit. Maybe we're more over on our hand position and the strings are different. But as far as I know, or as far as I think about them, the technique is more or less the same. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I think that was relatively self-explanatory. Let's keep going now and looking at some more examples in context. So, okay, so we've looked at some technical slurs there. The next one here, we start getting into this world of the slurs making the music sound different. So here, this is one of the pieces from Maro Julie's Papillon, the butterfly. And we've got these slurs here that connect the notes differently. So they're going to make the music sound different. And this is where we get into the musical side. So we have a technical where it's for mechanical reasons to make it easier or to help with alternation. And now we're starting to get into the world of where slurs are going to change the way the music sounds. So I'll play it once without any slurs. Fine. And now with slurs. So here the slurs serve to make the notes a little less articulated, but they also serve to connect little ideas. So the sound of a slur is notable, it's distinct. And so here we get dee da da dum, dee da da dum, dee da da dum. So this little sequence of scale fragments is helped, like the pattern of it is helped by having that sound of the slur at the beginning of each one. And here at the beginning, I think this will also help technically. Helps just have one less right hand movement, but it also helps group that section of notes, that arpeggio there of A minor, together. Here's an example of a musical slur. I think we can find some more examples of musical slurs too. Let's have a look at. We might keep this example here for ornaments, but let's have a look at this one here. Right? So this is from Francisco Targa's Prelude, number 1 in D minor. Oh no, what am I talking about? This is Adelita. Right? It's very familiar to us. Now, if we play these articulated, take out the slurs. Makes the music sound that much different. It is almost tied into the identity of this music, the slur, the sound of that connected note. Right? So there's an example there of how it really changes the sound and is quite in the identity of the music. As I said, it's integral. Here we can talk about these slurs here. This is Devisé's Prelude from his Suite in D minor. And towards the end here we have these slurs that move over more than one note in this case. And it really here ties the notes together as an idea. So it moves the note forward, it removes accents. And again, we get that sense of pattern because we have the repeated idea, and the slur helps to bring that pattern together. There's an interesting example right here, actually, of the fact that before, because these slurs appeared on the same string, we can slur the 3 notes together. And then this pattern is disrupted a little bit because this D is on a different string. So we can't always get that consistency that maybe we would ideally like, unless we potentially could if we change the fingering dramatically. We could do a barre there and put everything on the 2nd string. But as a player and also someone creating an edition, you have to do a bit of a toss-up there of what, is it worth it? Is it worth it to create quite a complex fingering just to achieve that musical consistency? So we've looked at music slurs here that's going to help the music in terms of connecting the notes, moving the notes forward. Now let's look at a musical context for slurs, which is really important. And that is the resolution of suspensions. So this is a relatively specific example, but it's using the natural tendency of a slur to have a stronger first note and a softer second note. We can have the inverse as well. We'll have a look at that. But here we have, and I wonder if anyone can actually, playing the guessing game, you can check it in the comments. What is this excerpt from? Because I don't have the composer up here, so it's a little harder to guess. And for that matter, if you want to have a guess at the second one, this is a tricky one. What's this example down here? Who's that by? The CGC show guessing game. Okay, up here, we're talking about suspensions here. And this comes from a study that is all about resolutions of suspensions and treatment of appoggiaturas. And here we have the F is a suspended note resolving to E. All of these little appoggiaturas are the suspended notes that are resolving. So when we use the slur technique, inherently it has that relationship of strong to weak, and that's what the suspension resolution relationship wants as well, like in a musicianship kind of context. Here it is. There's sort of other things to talk about here. They're not all slurs, but this is an example where we're using resolution of suspension, and we're bringing out that musical characteristic by using a slur. So, slurs used in the context of suspensions. Here, instead of appoggiaturas, we have achacaturas, which are faster grace notes that instead of having the emphasis on the grace note itself, it actually has it on the main note. So with the appoggiatura, we have strong to weak, and with the achacatura, we have the accent or the focus on the second note. So that first one. So we're starting to get into the world now of ornaments, which is another use case for slurs. So having that less articulated, it also allows you to play the notes really quickly. So there are some musical examples of musical cases for slurs. We've got ornaments, we've got resolutions of suspensions, we've got connecting notes, removing accents, we've got moving ideas forward, consistency of phrasing. So I'll be interested, I'm going to have to take a little break now. We'll get into playing some slurs on the guitar soon, but I wanted to see if there's any questions about these contexts, or is it clear what I've been talking about? Linda's offering some more. In German, tied notes are connected by Haltebogen. I don't know how to say that one. Halten equals hold. Linda's asking, were those slurs written in by Tarraga himself? Yes, I believe they were, absolutely. An interesting thing if you ever get the chance to play on a 19th century instrument, and at best with gut strings, it's a really interesting experience to give insight into the world of Giuliani and Fernando Sor and Carulli and Carcassi, because the modern instrument, the sound that we get from slurs, the sound we even just get from playing treble and bass is very different. In modern instruments, it's very clear, it's very articulate, it's very powerful. But on 19th century instruments, I would argue it's more vocal. It's got a softer execution on these notes. And so in some respects, it's actually easier to get this slur, like for instance, the idea of that resolution of suspension is comes a little more naturally on the instrument than in the modern instruments. We have to be really well versed in the difference in right hand pressure, the difference in the control of that left hand slow. So Richard has a question: how are the two types of suspensions, the emphasis, indicated on the score? Let me see the question. I'm not 100% clear on the question. The two types of suspensions. So we've got, well, I'm not 100% clear on the question, but I think I get the idea. And so the answer is that we don't often have a clear indication about what's going on. So we have to understand it in a theoretical concept. Or we can sometimes just hear it. If we get used to hearing a certain figure enough, we can hear a suspension to resolution. Or we can start to identify it in a theoretical way or just from the score. However, we do have the examples of the appoggiatura and the acciaccatura, and the difference in that notation there is the appoggiatura is the grace note without a slash in front of it, and the acciaccatura has a little slash through the note here, which I believe indicates that you're going to the next note quickly, and it sort of indicates that the next note is the prime focus, whereas the appoggiatura indicates to lean on that note. Dee-da, dee-da. The acciaccatura is ba-da, ba-da. It's a very distinct difference, but a very minute difference on the score itself. But often it's up to us to recognize suspensions and potentially any patterns that might benefit from slurs, unless they're put in by the editor or the composer themselves. It's up to us, actually, and that's a good example of a practical application of theory in music. Okay, so I think everyone's on board. Just a couple more things, and then we can get into doing some actual slurs together to workshop those. So the last couple is a little bit about confusion of markings. So this one here, this example, is from Saw Study in D minor. And it's an interesting section. Sorry, it's taking a while to read those notes. These markings are not slurs. And it's very confusing because often when we have these groupings of notes, it can be over longer sort of phrase markings. And we'll see that in a second in Bach's cello prelude. But when there's just a phrasing idea that the composer wants to communicate the relationship, da, da, da. See, these notes are connected over beats. Da, da, dee, da, 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 dee, da, da, as opposed to let me see if I can play it more clearly. Pairs of notes going dit da dit da dit da 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 is not what he wants. He's indicated these connecting ideas almost like little phrase markings. So it's a very different sound. Da da dee da dee da da, always going towards the beat. But it's very easy to confuse this with slurs. And if they were slurs, you look at this and go, how on earth do you play this? Because it's not actually possible to play those slurs. So it is good to know that sometimes these markings are not always slurs. They're not ties because their pitches are different. And they're not phrase markings because it's too short to be a phrase. But it's just indicating the connectedness of those notes. Now another example here, this is the piece in full, is the prelude by Bach, the first cello prelude. And there's many examples here of different applications. So at the beginning, we actually can use a slur here. If we were to articulate them, it would sound like this. It sounds nice, but it's quite different. However, throughout, because this is a cello piece, Bach, although it's not exclusive to cello or bowed instruments, but Bach's indicated these they're phrase markings, but they're also indicating groups of notes that are to be grouped together. There could be little motivic ideas, sort of not so much a phrase as a motif or a connection of these ideas. So if we're to look at this grouping here, sorry, I'm not in drop D. So they're groupings of notes. And then as a player, we can say, okay, we're going to group those notes, and then we can actually add in slurs to facilitate that grouping. So there's an interesting challenge here, but these markings are not slur markings. They're sort of phrase markings or groupings. You can see plenty of examples of this. And you will find more of these kinds of markings outside of the classical guitar world. In some ways, I wish that we would have more markings like this in the classical guitar world because they're often left out. In there, they'd also be indicating bowings. As in, instead of using a bow that moves on each note, rather it's the left hand fingers will move, but the right hand bow will be moving in one smooth movement, and that creates that legato movement. Yeah, Linda's just saying the difference between appoggiatura and acciaccatura. It's an interesting difference, and it's also, you could go in depth a little bit on how they were realized in different periods. The rhythmic duration for appoggiaturas differs a little bit in different periods of time as well. So there's a pretty good overview there of slurs in technical context and in musical context. So before we get into playing some slurs, are there any questions about any of that? One of the problems with carbon strings is they go out of tune. Okay, so I'll see if there are any questions that come in about this contextual ideas, musical and technical slurs, but let's get into some mechanical, some playing. So grab your guitar, if you would like, and we'll start out with this idea of, I will also get you the right hand in case it's useful. We'll start out with this idea of the free stroke versus the rest stroke slur. So if we do literally a pull off, we take the finger, we can put down your first finger on the 5th fret, 3rd string, and your 3rd finger on the 7th fret, 3rd string. And if we actually just literally pull off the finger straight up, not even using the right hand, we're just going to go. Because the finger sticks to the string a little bit, and there's movement on the string, you'll probably get a bit of sound. So that would be going pretty much perpendicular to the fingerboard. Now, if we think about that going up, now we want to, and that's our free, well, it's not really our free stroke because we're going straight up. Now let's go straight across. So I'm actually going to ask you to play the string like plucking. I'm going to pull almost down into the fingerboard and across to the next string. So that would be similar to what we call a rest stroke slur. And now if we split the difference, we're not going to go straight up, we're not going to go straight across, but rather we're going to clear the next string. Hopefully what you'll hear is that by going straight up, we get very little sound. By going straight across, we get the most amount of sound, and the most attack on the second note. And by lifting up and going sort of on a diagonal in between, 45 degrees if you will, we get a sound that's in between the two in terms of projection and volume. So the difference there is that we get a control then of the sound of the second note. And in the case of suspension, let's say, that's a good example. So if we resolve that suspension with a rest stroke slur straight across the next string as loud as we could, it's going to be quite abrupt, a kind of a harsh sound. Sometimes we want a clarity of sound, but in this case with a resolving suspension, we actually want a softer resolution. So in that case we might do a free stroke slur. And in fact we might lift up directly to get that really soft controlled second note. I wonder if you can go and change the angle of release of your slurring finger to get those different volumes of the second note. And that's where we start to get a real control of how the second note sounds, to carve out the relationship between those two notes. The next aspect about slurs is speed and placement. So they're going to really affect the sound that you're going to get. So speed as in the speed at which the finger comes down to the string, and placement as in the finger is placed right up against the fret. The speed needs to be quick and agile. We don't have to really be aggressive with the hand. Sometimes people advocate engaging the arm, sort of a wind up almost, just to get the sound, the feeling going. But it really is just sort of a lightness, a quickness, and also the placement of the finger is going to make that really impactful. And yes, you probably can help the second note by playing the first one loud, but that usually results in a very uneven pair of notes. So you can actually practice this just by doing left hand alone. Because we're really focused on the quality of the second note, because the first note's played by the right hand. Along with this, and this goes particularly well with rest stroke slurs, is that we can offer a bit of counter pressure with the other fingers. We have two notes. Again, we're on the 5th and 7th fret on the 3rd string. If we're slurring with the 3rd finger down to the 1st, we can offer some counter pressure here, pushing the finger up. And you can even see I'm bending the string kind of in an S shape a little bit, bending down, pushing up. And this offers resistance, and it gives you a much snappier sound. You don't want to do it so much that you distort the pitch, because you can do that. But to start off with, you might want to exaggerate it just to get the feeling. But eventually you're just adding a little bit of pressure so that you don't do this. This is something I see quite a bit. You're pulling down, kind of like pulling back the bow? Yes, the string, the bow of you know what I mean. A bow and arrow. I'm pulling back the string of a bow. I don't know what the string is called. And then releasing it. But the problem with that is as you pull back, you're changing the pitch. So two things that can help that is one is offering that counter pressure, so you keep the string in pitch, in tune, but also just being quick across the string. Not taking up the slack and then letting go. So no preparation, no drawing of the string, and then you have your movement quick and agile. So next up we have 3 and 4. So we get complexity here when we start doing more interesting things with the slow. So we have pairings of notes. We've got 1, 2, and 3, 1, which I would argue are probably the easiest. And then up in difficulty go 3, 2, and then whenever we start using the 4th finger in this process, we start getting really challenging movements. All right? So that is something to be acknowledged, that these different finger combinations have different levels of challenge. Finger strength and independence come into this. Other things that start playing into it, ascending and descending might be a little different to you. I think descending probably is the easiest to make a good second note because we have that ability to do a rest stroke, but the ascending can sometimes be hard to get a strong second note. The way I like to practice that is playing a very soft first note and then a loud slur. Let's do that together actually. It's a good exercise to work on making sure that you get enough sound out of the second note. So we can just do all of this up at the 5th fret with the 1st finger. We'll do 1 and 3. we'll go across from 6 to 1, and I want to do it twice each, and we're playing a soft first note and a loud second note. So it will sound like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, change string. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Heidi says, yes, community playing. I can't hear you, but I can imagine the sound. I've heard that. Many of us have heard the sound of 60 or so guitarists playing together. So that's a nice little exercise to work on the second note projecting a little bit more. Why don't we do 2 more little exercises about what we've been talking about? Because I was talking a lot, but we haven't played too much. Let's now do the same thing. We're going to descend from 3 to 1. And let's do this one where the first time we go through, we're going to make soft notes as the first one. So, the second one. So we're going to do our free stroke slur. We're going to clear the next string. And then the following one we'll do the rest stroke slur. So 2 on each string. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's now do rest stroke slur. So we're going to make the second note probably louder because we're going to really use that plucking motion of the left hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, a couple of things that happen in many cases. Slurs have a tendency to rush. The movement itself is fast. And what happens more often than not is the first note of the pair, whether it be ascending or descending, is not held long enough. And so we get this. Really very common. So what I want to practice one more time is that same idea. We'll do descending slurs, and you can do free stroke or rest stroke, whatever you like. But I want you to focus on keeping that first note long for its full duration. So let's try again, and now let's focus on playing that first note for its full duration, nice and slow. 1, 2, here we go. Hold, release. So we've dealt with 2 common problems there. One is rushing the rhythm. The other one is having a soft second note. Now, one that's a little bit more subtle or harder to deal with is the idea of, we've learned this idea of the rest stroke slur. And so sometimes that creates quite a snappy sound. And it could be kind of, well, ugly is subjective, but it's a much harsher sound probably than we're looking for. And so another exercise that would be useful is to play through really trying to control the second note. That gets to a much more sophisticated level. Once you've mastered the mechanics, you've got the good rhythm and you've got a clear note. Now we really want to be able to control the quality of that second note. And you'll find that as you go through, let's say if you did a repetition of 10 slurs, are there any variants within there, or are they consistent? Some are soft, some are loud. We want to get to the point where our slurs are in our control. We can have an accented second note, we can have an even second note, or we can have a soft second note. And the tone of that note is what we want as well, as opposed to kind of a snap or a bend or any of those sounds that can creep into it. I think I saw a couple of questions come in. So, Tenny, when playing descending slur after a string change, would you recommend, oh, this is a great question. Would you recommend putting both fingers, the pulling finger and the holding one, on the string at the same time, or one after the other? Thank you. I was going to mention that. In this exercise, you can see that I'll do it in sequence. So the answer is not at the same time, but rather move the first finger and then walk the other one across. So, and then you play the next note, then move. This is something that I think is an aspect that people learn sort of at grade 2 through 4, and it's this sequential movement of notes that we don't always need to have them come down as a block, you know. If we're playing that series of notes, which has a C major shape that people are often familiar with, we have these micro moments where we're arpeggiating in the right hand. We don't actually need to have the fingers down. And although in some cases it doesn't make much of a difference, in many it does, because it frees up our hand to move more like this as opposed to chunk, 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 which is difficult. So yes, move, move. You're walking the fingers, ascending and descending. It allows you to, if you don't, then you often get this break. So if you have a cut second note, you probably need to walk the fingers a little bit more to get that connection. Okay, well, so Tenny is saying that her son's guitar teacher asked to put both at the same time. Well, yeah, I hesitate to offer a difference if I'm not sitting there and seeing what's going on. I will say that it's sometimes good to have legato, to prepare fingers on the same string, but that's not so much slur technique as being able to make sure the notes are connected, especially ascending, down, 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 or even sometimes having the fingers down on the string. I would suggest that's a good way to encourage legato connection, but when we get more sophisticated and more comfortable, we can hear the legato connections, then I would advocate being more sequential with the fingers. So perhaps it's maybe where your son's stage is at, but it's hard for me to comment on your son's teacher's approach. John asks, what about an ascending slur done by sliding up instead of hammering on? Hard for me to get the second note clear. So I believe what John's talking about is this. And this is another way to connect notes, but it sounds quite different. This is known as Portamento or Glissando. And I mean, there was a good example in, what was it? A good example in the Barrios. Where is it? Sorry, sometimes this makes me seasick when people do this. Apologize. The Barrios, here it is. This is El Sueño de la Muñequita. So it's slur and slide. So you'll notice that this is a slur and this is a slide. Although it's not clearly indicated that that would be the case, but if it were both slurs, it would sound like that. It's often played like this. So you get the same execution of a grace note, but it does sound quite different. And all of this is about, well, we have the technical aspect, but we do have a lot of it's in this sound, but what kind of sound are we trying to create? And in the end, we're using a technique that has a certain sound to benefit the music. So we want that sound in the music, and we're going to employ that certain technique. So the the Portamento Glissando is a good way to connect those notes, although it's a pretty distinct sound and quite different to the Slur. So I think we're going to wrap things up, and maybe if you have some more questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. But the last thing I'll mention, I'll do two last things. One's kind of fun. As I said, slurs can be used for ornaments, and so we were just talking about ornaments there. Grace notes. But if you connect groups of slurs, we get trills. And one of the challenging things with slurs is the fatigue that can come out of them. We often don't have slurs that are trills that are that long anyway. But one thing that we can do, which is quite fun, is instead of doing, for instance, in this case, 2-1, to prolong a trill, we can actually go 2-1, 3-1. It's a really nice way to do a slur on one trill on one string, and you also can do it over long periods of time. So if you were playing an arrangement of a piece that maybe is arranged from piano, where they do sometimes have those long trills, that's my attempt at a long cross string trill. Maybe instead, you can try that with 2 and 3 and elongating that trill. The last thing as well I'll say is that whenever you have a fixed finger, it's going to make things that much more difficult. So it's good to be aware of that in case you get frustrated. And what I mean by that is if we have a slur somewhere, but another finger is doing something else. So let's say we have a barre down and the third finger's holding down a note. Whenever there's fixed fingers somewhere else and you're asked to do a slur, and in this case with the fourth finger, good grief. That's going to make things much, much more challenging. It requires more strength, more independence in the fingers, and I just wanted to mention that in case you've had a moment where I was like, why can't I get this slur? Well, it's probably because fixed fingers are making it that much more difficult. All right, I'm going to put down the guitar. We're right on the hour again. How's that for timing? Thank you for everyone who came and asked questions. Are there any more questions about slurs? Hopefully this gave you some interesting contexts and use cases and clarified some techniques as well. I feel like many of us know about slurs, but maybe there's been a couple of morsels of information in there that was helpful. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Claude. Matt, I hope you enjoyed the pot plant. Should the pot plant come back for another cameo? Maybe I can have something different on the music stand each time. But we'll be doing, what is it today? Yes, we'll have another live show next week. And following that, we will be attempting to stream live from Gotobafest, which is our annual online 3-day festival that we're running from the 22nd to the 24th of October. So I'm going to try and stream the first couple of hours of that, which is going to be at the same time. It might be a slightly different time, but we'll try and stream that. Matt says, more plants, bigger. All right, I'll see what I can do. I don't have many plants here, but I'll see what I can find. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks Jeff. Thanks Jana. Great to see you. Andrew, thanks for tuning in so late, and Linda. Crystal has a question. Do you have any comment about the positioning of the tip of the finger when preparing for a descending slur? I would always suggest to get the finger as on the tip and as close to the fret wire as possible, but I would also say that as we're descending, the positioning of the finger on the first note is probably less important than an ascending slur, if that makes sense. So we're doing 1-3. When we're going up to 3, the positioning of that third finger is really important because that's the one that's going to make the sound. But as we're going down, probably is actually a little less important. But I would generally say on the tip of the finger and also up close to the fret wire. Yeah, James looking forward to Gotobafest. James will be there. Martha, you're welcome. Judy, thank you. And Dave and Nikki, thank you very much for being here. And James, for being on the stream. It's always great to have our colleagues at CGC here at the live session. Okay, I will see you all next week. All right, bye everyone.